Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm Apsara DeQuinzio, Senior Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Nevada Museum of Art. And it is my pleasure to welcome you this evening. And we have a very special conversation in store between the artist Edgar Arceneaux and the inimitable Charles Gaines, both of whom are stalwarts of the LA art scene. And we are just thrilled to have you both here with us this evening. So thank you for joining us. So Edgar Arceneaux is just completing his stay at the Joyner Jafrida Artist Residency Program here in town. And with this project, we are marking our third Joyner Jafrida Visiting Artist Program at the museum. Some of you may recall that earlier this summer, we welcomed Thomas J. Price, and later this month, we will be welcoming the Brazilian artist Rodrigo Cass, who will be in residence. And before I introduce our distinguished guests this evening, I want to extend thanks to Pamela Joyner and Fred Jafrida, who make this series possible, and for their collaboration and for their ongoing support of this institution. Okay. Edgar Arceneaux works in the fields of drawing, sculpture, installation, performance, and video, and basically any other medium that exists. And he often explores the tensions between historical events and the present-day understanding or misunderstanding of those events. His historical excavations assume many different forms and traverse a wide array of subjects, ranging from Michael Heiser's controversial land art piece in Detroit to Ben Vereen's infamous performance in 1981 at Ronald Reagan's inaugural gala, to the importance of Paul Revere Williams' architecture. In his recent body of work, Skinning the Mirror, several examples of which you just saw outside in the theater gallery, he uses mirrors as a device to explore the making and unmaking of identity, specifically in relation to memory. Using found mirrors, he separates the reflective substrate from the sheet of glass, which he then applies to a prepared canvas. And I'm sure we'll hear much more about that process in this conversation. Many museums have mounted solo exhibitions of his work and acquired his work, including the Hammer Museum, MCA Chicago, the Walker Art Center, and SF MoMA, just to mention a few. Born in 1972, Arceneaux received a BFA from the Art Center College of Design and an MFA from the California Institute of the Arts, also known as Cal Arts. And speaking of Cal Arts, Charles Gaines is an artist, writer, philosopher, and a professor emeritus at Cal Arts, where he taught for many years many of the leading artists in the LA art scene, including Edgar Arceneaux. A pivotal figure in the field of conceptual art, Charles Gaines's body of work engages formulas and systems that question the relationship between objects and their relationship to the symbolic realm and the world at large. Using a generative approach to create various serial bodies of work in a variety of media, he has forged a critical link between the early conceptual artists of the 1960s and the 1970s and more recent generations of artists employing conceptual strategies. Recently, he had a major survey at the ICA Miami, which traveled, and in 2015, his retrospective was organized by the Studio Museum in Harlem and traveled to the Hammer in LA. An exhibition of his work is also currently on long-term view at Dia Beacon in New York. His work is in many of the most esteemed museums around the country, including, of course, the Joyner DeFrida collection, which, by the way, is a museum disguised as a private collection. Born in 1944 in Charleston, South Carolina, Gaines began his career as a painter, earning his MFA from the School of Art and Design at the Rochester Institute of Technology in 1967. Please join me in welcoming Edgar Arceneaux and Charles Gaines.
So it's really a pleasure. Edgar told me that I had to use that word. To have the act seriously, to have this opportunity to talk to Edgar about his work, and because we've known each other for a long, long time, and it's ever since his graduate school days and before. And we've watched each other's career developments over all of those years, and we've worked on projects together, and so we've had a close collaboration for a long time. And so I find it a distinct honor to have this opportunity, Edgar, to give notice to somebody I feel is one of the finest artists in the United States. So I also want to congratulate the show. The show, it's a beautiful installation, and one of the works I'm familiar with because it was in a show that I curated down at Hauser and Wirth. The other two works are just astounding, and so I want to congratulate you for that. And I want to get into a discussion about your work process, but first I would, if you don't mind, give us some brief history of the things that got you interested in art. You know, I heard that you picked up a paintbrush and made a painting 2 months after you were born. I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to know, and it's a question that artists ask all the time, how did it evolve that you pursued a career as an artist?
Yeah. And before I answer the question, I just wanted to say that one of the things that Charles and I hopes to do today is that we'll talk to each other for 30 minutes, and then we hope that we get to talk to you for the last 30 minutes of the conversation. So don't feel any pressure to ask questions, but I'll definitely be looking at some people to get the pump going. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you all for coming. And it's been such a pleasure to work here in Reno. I had no idea what I was going to be getting myself into when Pam and Fred and Afsara had me here. I think that my beginning of art, at least my sense of making, as a little kid, I grew up with my grandfather's paintings were always on the wall. His name is Edgar as well, and my mother would always tell me stories about how great he was and how he made his paintings and about his life. But then as I got older and I also had an interest in art, then people would start telling me stories how I look like him, I walk like him, I talk like him. But my grandfather died 3 months before I was born. So as I started to think about what's actually happening here, am I him? Early on I was raised Catholic, so my ideas around the metaphysical or anything that was kind of transient was connected to a kind of a faith kind of moral framework, so but as I started getting older, I started questioning that connection. But what I realized that it did is that it opened up in my mind this understanding that the world is made up of not just material things, but also immaterial things, and that these immaterial things from the past oftentimes are propelling the thing in the present. And this past I tend to call a kind of the fog of history, you know, and how I'm going to mix some metaphors now, but like that the ripple effects of the past are constantly expressing themselves in the present. And as an art maker, I felt like the best tool to kind of deal with picturing that or how to understand that was through, you know, being an artist.
Yeah, so that you had this kind of sort of philosophical bent quite early. In other words, somehow you felt the material of art making can allow you to address these kind of quasi-metaphysical, quasi-mystical questions about general meaning.
My first drawings were Care Bears on the back of paper bags we didn't really have big paper, so I would take the grocery bags and I would cut them open and then I would make drawings. But you know, my parents were very supportive. You know, my mother loved her dad, and you know, and my dad also. They were all very supportive of me, you know, continuing to draw and paint. But you know, it wasn't until I got into high school that I had my real first art class. So before then, I would just fiddle around on my own and just try to figure out things and use the supplies that I could.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you were before that, when you were at the Art Center, I watched some of your student work there, and then when you came to Cal Arts as a graduate student, I noticed that your general interest in culture, and that interest in culture took different forms, but it seemed to me that you approached cultural subjects, the early ones having to do with popular figures, for example, but it also expanded into an interest in exploring these social issues and political issues and identity issues, for that matter. And I noticed that you used a kind of visual language, a representational language, where which I am saying brought in these questions with respect to those subjects on a metaphysical plane. You had a highly poetic interest, a highly poetic use of representation, and you employed that and even when you were doing representational work, you employed that aesthetic language. And so I saw these two venues, these two parts, this critical part having to do with social and cultural issues and personal issues, but I also saw this interest in poetry and aesthetics, and finding that somehow speaking about these things through that language was quite meaningful. But then you started making abstractions.
Well, there's a lot of time between those two moments.
Well, I'm not finished.
Oh, you're not. Oh, you're not. We're gonna ask him for a recap because I think I'm gonna do that too. Okay.
So in an interview, you said 10 years ago you started working in abstraction 10 years ago, and that your first impulse was to deal with that abstract work because you wanted to go to a level of a practice that just was about the painting, wasn't about these other ideas that had been interesting to you in the past. But then, almost immediately, that kind of abstract language was being used to address political, social, cultural issues. And I was wondering where you stand with respect to that. And more generally, your ideas about the relationship of representation and abstraction.
Okay. Did you guys get all that? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm going to try hitting these one at a time. So, is there anybody who draws in here? Any drawers in here? Okay. Oh, yeah, it's good. It's quite a few. There's probably way more. There's a lot of people. If you're just a person who moves a pencil around as a drawer. But, you know, there is something that happens when you're drawing, because it really started with drawing for me. And actually, me recognizing that my interest in pop culture had these kind of deeper resonances, it happened in part because of me studying with you. So you should take some blame for that. But, you know, like I said, you know, I started off drawing Care Bears, but, you know, like, if anybody here who uses a pencil and you shade, right? When you're shading at a certain point, if there's any irregularities either in the pencil or in the paper, it makes a groove or a bump or something that comes out of this field of just moving the pencil across the paper. At some point, those grooves and those bumps, they start to form a pattern, and that pattern produces some sort of geometry, and then something happens in the mind where you start to connect those dots, right? And then it becomes features of the thing that you're drawing. So I would say, like, at a very, very base level, materially, I've always been interested in the emergent properties of whatever material it is that I'm working with. But then when you're shading and you're using line, then what are you doing? Making pictures of, right? So I find myself being drawn to pop culture images because it's a kind of language that communicates to people across a very broad sector of our society. So if I do a drawing of Superman, then like everybody in some way understands who Superman is. But if I put my own head on Superman's body, then it becomes this whole kind of other thing, But it was later on, again, after my studies with you and then thinking more deeply about it, that things that are popular within culture that really resonate, that really, really stick around for a long time, is because there's something in the background of that story that's resonating with the general popular consciousness that allows it to stay in the foreground of our thinking, right? So like, for example, like the movie The Matrix, like for anybody here who saw the Matrix film, like that movie was fantastic because of the special effects and Keanu Reeves and the martial arts, but really in the background of that story, it's a Hegelian story about the slave gaining the power of the master and liberating himself, right? So I think that's the reason why that story continues to be relevant. Unfortunately, the filmmakers didn't realize that, and they made part 2 and part 3, and they were terrible. They should have asked me, and I would have told them what made it good. But anyway, but to your larger point is that with all of my projects, and like Absara was saying, I do work across a lot of mediums. And the reason for that is because it matches my temperament because I'm interested in the difference between things. But also it's because there's certain things that you learn in drawing that you can apply to another discipline. And it's really just a way of understanding like what's axiomatically true about a certain kind of method, right? So you test it in all these different domains, right? But I'm also constantly throwing myself into a situation where I'm always a beginner and I don't know what I'm doing, so that the risk for failure is super, super high. But I'm gonna try to kind of pull your whole question together. There's usually 3 things that makes up a project for me. There's usually some sort of larger social history that I'm interested in, right? So talking about roots or, what are some of the other things that I've done stuff, libraries or, Library of Baghdad, whatever it is. But then there's some personal connection that I have anecdotally with that particular history. And then the third element that makes up a project for me is some sort of material process. Sugar crystals, graphite, or, but normally that material, which is abstract in nature, using mirrors, for example, I would always make those subservient to the narrative. But I understood that the material itself had meaning and it had context and it had history, but I would always make the material process subservient to the story. So what I decided to do was to take those 3 points and reorient it, and then allow for the material process to be forward-facing, and then tell myself there is no story. There's no story here. Just allow the materials to tell you what it wants to be. And that took me, and it was like a year. It was very, very challenging for me because I'm constantly being like, what is this about? What is it? Blah, 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 blah. And then that's sort of how I've got to the point that I'm at now.
A little
How did I do? Was that pretty good? Was that fine? Yeah.
Well, I'm still a little confused.
You're confused.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, I was trying to read the expression on his face. Because
one of the things that attracts me toward the work is your use of materials and how you treat it and how you rely. And you talked about the effects of the quality, drawing quality. That is the behavior of lead on paper. That how the construction process that you use is always quite visible, and owing to my question, that that's what you're presenting as the continued investment in abstract language, to make the materiality of the work super present.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, right now, but I mean, I've always thought that the process was the most important thing in any project that I've done. I've always thought the process was most important, so people can get a sense of how these oftentimes disparate elements, how they would come together and like produce a story. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, honestly.
No, that answered it, because looking at, maybe you can go on, because the next question has to do with addressing these what we've been talking about in relationship to this project, and the interplay of content and materiality that is present. That is how that relationship plays out in this project. On the one hand, you have the shattered mirrors. You have skinning the mirror. I saw a couple of wonderful videos of you showing the process of peeling the backing from mirrors and revealing that material. Was that mercury material that's behind it? Yeah.
Sober, yeah.
Yeah, and I was struck by the incredible labor that went into that, and how that labor is completely present in the work. Yet it contains this strong representational factor that you're talking about. So I understand what you said. A moment ago I had no idea what you said, but now now I'm clear.
This is a snapshot of our friendship over the last 30 years.
And I was wondering if you can use this show as a way of talking about how representation abstraction is working, and maybe introduce people to that complicated process that you use in creating imagery.
Sure. Okay. So let me just recap. So I can share the process first. That makes sense. And then, yeah, how do I describe what the pictures are? So it's evolved over the last 5 years. There's a bunch of images playing. I'm not sure what you guys are seeing. Oh yeah, that's so timely, because in some way that's
I always liked that work.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece, isn't it? Yeah, but how do you make how do you make something present which is invisible? So the process is that, I'll take a mirror. It could either be found or purchased. And on the back of a mirror, if you guys have ever looked at one, there's the backing paint that's on there. But if you peel that away, beneath that layer of paint is a very thin layer of terracotta clay. If you peel that layer away, then the silver is beneath that. And then between the silver and the glass is an invisible layer of metal called tin. It's a layer of tin. It's a tin coat. So all of those things make up the mirror. And the terracotta is there to make the light that reflects from the mirror warm. So you don't look like a zombie when you look in the mirror, right? So your face is brown and warm and full of life. So what I do is I strip away those layers, and then once I have the mirror exposed, and I'll start to paint on it, draw on it, scratch into it. At some point it might break. The shattering could cause certain sorts of patterns that happen, depending upon how I hit it. And then the gaps are exposed in the surface of the mirror. Those gaps are super important to me, because it's kind of, in many ways, it's the point of breaking the mirror is less about the metaphors and the kind of cultural stories that we tell ourselves about mirrors being bad luck, for example, but really more about the gap that's formed behind the mirror, and that it gives us access to a space that you couldn't have access to otherwise. And then I try to fill that gap with different things, with paint, with paper, sometimes with grass or weeds or whatever. And I like this idea that there's something in the background and it wants to be known and is trying to express itself, but it can only do itself through the gaps, right? So that's on the kind of material level. So once the painting is done, then I'll lay a wet canvas as a very final layer, and then once that's dry, then I'll peel that off. And it can be a very physical process where I have to stand on top of it. I have to take the canvas, I crumble it in my hands. It's very, very physical. I have to take a knife and dig into it. It's actually very beautiful to see because then the glass is falling and the crunching under my feet. It's dangerous and violent and poetic at the same time. But then what starts to happen is that as I'm peeling it, then there's certain levels of adhesion and there's certain levels of tearing. And then it's in those spaces of adhesion and tearing and yielding that it starts to express the labor of all that stuff that comes out, right? All the different layers of color, the silver, all of those different things start to happen in that process of the peeling. And I can't anticipate any of it. So it just kind of just starts to happen on its own. Does this make sense what I'm explaining to you all, how I'm doing this? Okay, so in many ways it's like a reverse process. It's also kind of like printmaking a little bit. But then once the silver and the painting is revealed to the world, like this one, I realized was partially, I'm telling the story about how I discovered that the paintings, at least this series, was connected to my mother's dementia. But once the silver is separated from the mirror, it slowly starts to what you would commonly call oxidize. But what's actually happening is that it's slowly absorbing little proteins that are floating in the atmosphere, and it chemically bonds itself to the silver, and it causes it to change into different colors, like different blues. Not blues, but in browns and yellows, occasionally green. So this interactivity that it's having with the surface is important. How are we doing time-wise? We're doing fine, okay. So that's more or less the process. So I'll take the mirror, the painting, I'll put it in different parts of the world or make them in different parts of the world. So these paintings that I'm making here are all absorbing little bits of Reno, you know. They're very, very specific. Little bits of you. If you stand in that room, you know, a little bit of your DNA is going onto that surface. So what was the second part? Oh, about representation itself, or how the image is generated?
Yeah, and I think you sort of addressed that.
Yeah.
That floating above this process are memories and thoughts of your mom.
Well, that was in the beginning. So basically, when I started on this process in 2019, 2020, my mom had been diagnosed with dementia. And I think she had it for much longer, but it really started to accelerate during the time that I was making this work. And it was, she got to a point to where she needed us, her kids, to take care of her. So I have 5 brothers and sisters, so we became her nurses. So, we would feed her, brush her teeth. At a certain point, we had to bathe her. My mother is very much a very Catholic woman. So the thought of her kids seeing her naked would kill her. Like, immediately, she would just die, right? But at the point that she was, cognitively, she needed that care, and because we were so close, we decided to do it. So I had to be confronted with my mother's 82-year-old body of having 6 kids and lived a pretty robust life. And some of the wrinkles in her skin, some of the bruises, the way that the muscle was slowly separating from the bone because she was starting to have bits of aphasia, so she wasn't really eating, and her body was shrinking. And it was one day, and the one painting that I'm pointing at before, that we had just put her to bed. It was a really, really difficult day. Like, she wouldn't eat, she wouldn't walk. I put her to bed. I went to the studio, and I skinned that painting. And it was at that point that I realized that the paintings in some way, in some sort of parallel way, were talking about what was happening to my mother's body as well as what was happening to her mind. The fragmenting, the fracturing of her, the holes that were existing there, but also the way that the silver sat on top of the paint and it felt like loose skin. These are all illusions, right? Kind of poetic expressions that came from the process. But this was at the time when I was telling myself, there is no story here, Edgar, there's no story. But then a story found it, right? The story found it.
Yeah, I have the feeling that one of the contributions of artists of color to this general discussion of abstraction is welcoming in the idea of representation, content, not just a reflection on a pure abstract language that is imbued with this content. And so that's really interesting to me because it's easy to embrace the relationship through the shattered glass, because you hammer the glass, it turns into triangular shards. You use that as a compositional element in the framing of the work and the coloring. But you're using these experiences that you can't help but to see as violent. So, a shattered, a broken glass, a glass is not violent. Violent is a reading or a metaphor that we give to the experience, and I think you do a really good job of continuing that what I see as a practice in minority arts of color, of embracing content and abstraction.
Yeah.
And maybe this is good to slip into the next question, because I was wondering if you can make give us some idea about how your interest in theater overlaps with your interest in visual art, visual art production. You said in an interview once that one of the earliest experiences that you had is that you can find in both experiences how it thrusts you into the present, how it thrusts you into the now moment. Can you go into that a little bit?
The now moment. Yeah, any theater people in the room? Any theater makers? The same people who are drawing are doing theater too. Okay, my tribe is here. I didn't intend to go into theater. It was something that was thrust upon me. I took it as an opportunity to do something where I could fail publicly in front of, hundreds of people. And, it turned out that I was pretty good at it. But there is something about a kind of storytelling which is like, if you're doing live theater, the story that you're telling is being informed by the reactions that the audience is having with the piece. So one of my muses, one of my closest friends, Frank Lawson, is here. He was in my very first play. We've been touring this piece about Ben Vereen for 10 years, off and on. And there was just something about the presentness of it, the ability to for a story to be sculpted in real time with all these things that could go wrong, that just makes it so powerful as an experience. So, but the relationship between painting and that is not entirely that, or making art is not entirely that, because as a conceptual artist, which I still consider myself to be, is the idea first and the material comes second. And if you're working in theater, and if you're working in the way that I work, which is through a devised process, you and your entire team, you may have the core idea, but you and the entire team, you're building it together, and everyone is adding something to it, so the story is really sculpting itself in time, But when you're working in the studio, if I'm working in this process now, I never really have a plan when I'm going in there. Like, I'm just basically confronting the choices that I made the day before. So there's something very kind of risky about that, because, you just have to really be in the present and then just trust that whatever you do now will produce some interesting questions for the next time, But when I'm in the studio, it's pretty much only me. So like you have a studio, you have 4,000 people in there working, If you come and visit me, it's gonna be Edgar and maybe a second person. And there's something really lovely about that isolation that I have. And then working with a team of 20 designers and actors and stuff. Like that too is also enriching in a very different way.
Excellent. So the last question I want to ask is, perhaps you can talk about the residency, being a part of the Joyner Jafrida residency program. Could you talk about your experience? What do you think that's done for you? It's done for you. How do you think not only this residencies, but residencies like it really are, why they're important to artists, why they're crucial, institutions for artists? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, why Pam? Why Fred? Why are you guys doing this stuff to artists, putting us in this big house with all this food and space and nature and clean air, and then expecting us to do something wonderful? Thank you for that, by the way. There's something really special about this particular residency at this juncture in my life right now because of the work that I'm making. And, to be able to go into their home and see all of these amazing, abstract paintings, all this amazing artwork. Some of the people in this room are in that collection as well. And, to recognize that you're part of this larger lineage and you can actually see the work right in front of you. You can see the choices that they made. You can secretly maybe touch something that you're not supposed to when they're not looking, So like there's something like you get to be directly in contact with the people, to see your work there too, also in this larger historical context. Because, as artists, we never really sure if what we're doing really matters that much. You know what I mean? Like, how are we building on the things that we've inherited? And like, are we really adding something to the discourse, So that's a really important, valuable aspect. I know, Fred, you're back there somewhere. And then, oh, there you are. Thank you, Fred. But the other part of it, too, is like, I'm in Reno. I mean, it's a very dry, airy climate. There's bears here that could possibly kill me at any moment. Not even kidding. That's actually a real concern. I had a dream a couple nights ago that bears broke into the house. I am still traumatized by it. But also there's a lot of Paul Revere Williams buildings here too. And because there's such a wonderful community, like people like Jackie and Steve and Robin and all that, like we've worked to give me access to these places. I've actually been in Paul Williams' different buildings and homes and got to breathe in the air and the space.
One of your pieces in the galleries uses Paul as a subject.
Yeah, Paul Williams, the architect. Oh, yeah, you just missed it. Yeah, and this painting here is an earlier piece. So I've been able to be very specific and very site-related being here. It's been really wonderful. It's also, the silver operates differently in different climates, so I've been trying to work all over the world right now so I can understand the difference, and shit here is different. All I can say is some of my paintings got black real quick. I don't really understand why, but they did. I have to talk to a scientist to figure that out. But residencies are important because, they give artists time and space just to really just focus and not really think about anything else, So thank you to all of you who've been so supportive of me being here, feeding me, getting me drunk, feeding me strong drinks, Steve, it's been a really a gift.
Thank you, Edgar. I think we can open it up for questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we'd like to do is just have you wait for a mic. So my colleague Fran has one on that side and I'll have one on this side. And we just want to record your questions for the archive, but also so that they can hear it.
We did. Charles and I, we be blabbing on all the time. So if we stayed in a half an hour, that is a minor miracle. It is a miracle. We stayed in 30 minutes. It's incredible. Yeah.
Well, my question is how you began, and it looks like there's very exciting, wonderful underpaintings, and with all of your work as well, and that you build up these layers. And so, how do you begin your first layers, and what kinds of materials do you use for those?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. That's one of the things that if you're a filmmaker or if you're a theater person, the first question that you always have to ask yourself is, where do you put the camera? You know what I mean? That's the hard part. And then when you're starting a painting or any picture, the hardest question is, what do you do first, right? So sometimes what I'll do is just to kind of like dirty the material a little bit, I'll just take some dirty water and I'll just throw it on there and just let it dry. And then that way I kind of desanctified it. Now I can kind of like fuck it up a little bit. Oftentimes it's the first thing that I'll do. And then that'll produce a pattern or a shape. And then from there, the next thing that I do to kind of get out of my own way is that I'll make what I consider to be a bad decision. I'll take a color combination that I think is kind of putrid or in bad taste, and then I'll start with that. Like a lime green next to purple. And I'll be like, oh man, it's so bad. And then it'll make like a brown, and then you're like, oh, it's so terrible. You know what I mean? And then you walk away, and then you come back, and then you hope that like maybe the two things will make like a really beautiful something. And then you kind of start from there. Basically, you have to create a problem. I create problems for myself. And then once I had the problem, then it gives me something. It gives me a place to start. Yeah.
Great. Exciting process.
Thank you. Yeah. There's one in the back. Usually the conversation gets really interesting after the talk, you know what I mean? So just pretend that the talk ended and feel free to talk to each other. You know, like you don't even have to ask me anything or Charles. We're happy just to, you know, we just talk to each other all the time, you know. So too much probably, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was really pleased to hear your reference for Paul Revere Williams. And as a Black artist that lives in Reno and has for, you know, the last decade or so, we've had a lot of strife trying to uplift the sanctity of the work that he's contributed, not only to Reno, but to the other, you know, many areas that he has. And I'm wondering if it's given you some insight as to what the Black artist experience in Reno is like, and if you think that these continuing residencies and the Joyner Graffiti projects that they're having might help to uplift and exalt artists who have passed but are very much a part of our culture that are not as recognized as maybe they should be.
Yeah. Well, I is it sad if I say you're the first Black artist from Reno I've met? Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to know you exist. You know, yeah, I haven't really had a chance to connect with the scene. I think because of the location of the residency is kind of up in the hills there, that we haven't really had the chance to connect to kind of the broader community yet. I think that's what this talk is for and what the exhibition is for. So yeah, let's chat. I would love to learn more about what you're saying. Also, you know, I mean, there's so many amazing Paul Williams buildings here. Like we've eaten at the Royce a couple times. Did you know that's a Paul Williams house, right? The food is really good and the drinks are fantastic. But you know, I feel like with Paul's work, I don't think a lot of people know just how many of his buildings are here and why. So the stories that I've been learning have actually been very interesting, and Apsara and Colin probably have learned more about it than they probably wanted to. But they're good resources of people to connect with as well. Yeah. Anyway, what's your name, by the way?
Lily.
Nice to meet you, Lily. Okay.
I had just a simple inquiry. If this body of work, or if you're inspired by Jack Whitten?
Yes. I'm still coming to know Jack's work. It's been great to get to know it and to see it in person. You know, hear it. I've seen it all over. I don't look at a lot of abstract painting to make the work that I do. I look to understand what the thinking is behind the artists and why they make the choices that they make. So when I learned recently that Jack was was also reading the writing of, Mandelbrot, that like totally blew me away, you know what I mean? Because, Mandelbrot is one of the forefathers of chaos theory and, complexity theory, and one of the reasons why he started working with these little, cubes of paint was because of the work that was coming out of that science. And that's been a big influence of me for probably over the last 20 years, So for me, like, I look at the work, but I also look at what inspired the person to make the choices that they make. And I love when I find myself walking the same path of somebody that I respect and not even knowing that we're sort of dieting on the same material, being inspired by the same things.
Yeah, I wanted to say that the relationship is even closer than even I think you realize. I knew Jack because I'm like real old. And one of the things, in fact, I was talking to Pam about this today, that Jack was an abstract painter who had a deep interest in science and metaphysics. And so that interest in those areas helped frame the kind of abstract language that he created. So for me, that's the link to content. Yeah. And I see how your link to content is quite similar. The transcendent on that, with these broad questions that starts with the local and then moves on to sort of these broad, so acceptable issues. And so I think there's a really close relationship in temperament, not in the way the work looks, but very close.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
There's a question at the back corner.
Oh. Hi.
I find it fascinating that your artwork changes over time, and knowing that you're doing multimedia, have you thought about a time lapse, looking at your artwork changing over time?
I did a big painting in Taipei over a year and a half ago, and it was like 36 feet by 9 feet, and I asked them to document it every 3 weeks. And the change was radical. Time lapse would be, I think, a challenge because I think the shift would not be fast enough for the amount of data it would be recording. So I have taken snapshots to try to capture it. I'm hoping at some point I could work with a conservationist who would like really sit with me and help me to understand. One of my friends, Suzanne Vilmeter, my gallerist who's here, her husband is a scientist and he works at Caltech in the proteins lab. And so whenever I'm working on any project that has anything to do with science, I go to him and I'm like, hey, help me to understand what this is about, right? So, but he showed me like the way that protein colors can change on silver, and it can go from really, really deep browns, almost blacks, across oranges, reds, yellows, greens. And so right now I'm like just traveling all over the world to see if I can find those different colors, you know. But the time-lapse thing, not yet, but I do take little snapshots, yeah.
I was curious if you could talk a bit more about the part of your process when the gaps appear in the work and the decisions that you make in terms of what you fill in those gaps with. A lot of times when there are gaps in artworks or stories, we tend to put ourselves into them, and that's how we connect with them. So I was curious if there was some thinking behind that part of your process.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things, just to connect back to what Charles was saying earlier about Jack and him and his generation and my generation, I did recognize that Saul DeWitt is I'm a big fan of Saul DeWitt, and he's been a big influence on me, and I know he was a friend of Charles as well. And as I was looking at their work, I understood that their use of the grid was very much kind of, don't take this as a slight, okay? This is just me saying this, okay? So, but it's very much of the 20th century, and by that I mean like the paradigm of the 20th century is physics and biology and taking things apart and cutting things up into little units and then understanding how those little units work and then maybe putting them back together again. But the paradigm of the 21st century is not physics, but it's like information sciences by information technology, gene, genetic splicing. Anyway, so all those things are about how relationships flow and move and interact with each other. So with some of the projects I started doing when I was really thinking about Charles's work and Saul's work was me figuring out how do I talk about some of the same interests, but using the paradigms of the 21st century, which is about interaction and the way that change performs itself over time. So the breaking of the mirrors for me is a way of allowing for that change to happen, but it being absolutely not based on the grid, but that it does have a pattern and it does have shapes, but there's a certain kind of the appearance of order and appearance of randomness. So when those gaps start to form, the decision is, at least on a very material level, is that do you put something in that gap or do you try to stay away from putting something in there? And you can't always determine, because basically it becomes a negative space on the picture, and then that means that whatever is on the canvas starts to perform through that space. But because I'm working with fluid materials, I can't always tell when a thing will flow into a gap and not. But then the other part of it is, it doesn't even mean that the gap is going to stick to the canvas. It may just stay on the floor. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm sorry, what the woman was saying to me earlier about where do I start. My process is like a kimono, like a Japanese kimono. So like all of the good shit that I'm doing, like you guys will never see. Like I do, the paintings are actually really interesting, Charles. They're really interesting, but then I put a blanket on top of it and then sandwich it between silver, and then you don't get to see any of that. So anyway, that's meant to be funny. Was that funny? That wasn't funny, was it? No, it wasn't funny. No. Yeah.
So why do you want to cover it?
Why do I want to cover it?
Wait a minute, let me get a mic.
Oh yeah, I can repeat the question. Why do I want to cover it?
Yeah, so why do
Yeah.
you want to see it?
Why? Because it's there. It's there. You know, I mean, well, sometimes there'll be 5, 10 layers of stuff, right? But the material doesn't really allow for you to see it all, you know.
In this town of Reno,
Can we get her a mic, because
Yeah.
we're recording this for an archive.
Yeah. Yeah.
so in this town of Reno, the light is very different. So it makes a huge difference to how your work is seen.
Yeah.
I imagine by you too.
Yeah.
So when you're working on it, and the dryness and the light and the atmosphere
Yeah.
and how high we are alters it differently, like you were saying. So are you going to be working here for a long time or just briefly?
I've been here for 2 months, but there unfortunately is an ending to the residency, so it's Monday. They're kicking me out. So yeah, this is pretty much it. But I mean, you know, if they might invite me back again if there's a gap in the schedule. But you know, but to your point, like the reason why I'm not actually covering it up in the sense that I'm trying to hide it.
Right.
It basically, what happens is during certain kinds of pulls or certain kinds of rips, those layers can reveal themselves, but I can't design it so that it will. Just sometimes it does.
Yeah,
and I
so-
can't predict when it will.
So you were saying you want to archival it in some ways. Why do you bother?
To archival the...
Archival your work. So in other words, make it stay on for posterity. Why do you bother?
Oh, well, that's a good point. So you get asked the same question about the Colosseum, right? Like, why don't you just let it fall all the way
it's
down?
kind of falling apart.
It is. Everything is.
Yeah.
But there's something that happens. There's something that happens when you encounter something where it's in a visible state of change in its life. There's a certain kind of sublime expression that happens when you encounter something where you know that it can no longer stay. It can never go back to what it was.
No.
Right? So in your mind, you fill in that gap by what it used to be. So because, and this is one thing that I didn't talk about, and I'll try to add this to your question, is that these are mirrors, and the paintings are still mirrors. So you can actually see your own figure in the painting if you get close enough to it.
Yes,
Right.
so you may see yourself changing.
Well, you see yourself on the surface of, you see yourself reflected on a surface that is change.
Yes.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes,
So I
it's
feel like it's a
changing.
more accurate.
It's
I feel like it's a
changing
more
you
accurate.
over time.
Well,
We
I think it gets closer to who we actually are.
Yeah.
Because we're verbs, we're not nouns. We are constant flows. And when people stop flowing is when you know that they're dead.
There's
But
a
if
woman
you're
here who's
using
been waiting
something-
very patiently for a mic, so
Oh,
let's let her
sorry.
ask a question.
I like the feistiness of that. Keep it up. Yeah, keep that going. Yeah, go ahead, Shanique. Go ahead.
Hey.
Hi.
Oh, that was great, guys. I have a question for you in this process. How are you deciding to stretch them? it seems like there's a cropping that's going on. Is that an aesthetic choice?
Yeah, and then these are some of the earlier ones. Well, you know, the mirrors that I have have a certain. They're only so big or so small, so the edge of the picture is always somehow in conversation with the edge of the glass, right? So now that I'm actually working the canvas a little bit more before I engage it with the mirror, that edge is becoming more. Actually, it's funny, you know, I did a bunch of shaped canvases in Berlin. I have to show them to you. Yeah, they're not stretched at all. And they're real craggly at the ends. They kind of cut me a little bit. Yeah, I have to show them to you. Yeah, I know. You're seeing into the future. I'll have to answer your question over drinks tonight. I'll show you a picture of them. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, buddy.
Hey, thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Charles. You know, in reference to Paul Williams, when you think about Paul Williams, born 1894, the latter half of the first generation of emancipated African Americans, what did it mean to be the first licensed African American architect west of the Mississippi in 1921, the first land commission in 1920, to then design the homes of Frank Sinatra and Lucille Ball and what have you? What did it mean to be an architect, to actually have a practice that you made things that were made for the public, to be seen, and to have many different architectural styles? It meant that in that particular era, he began to show the public his humanity through form and through change and through experimentations and through material. And so when I think about Edgar and everything that he's saying here, it's not just the paintings themselves, it's also him. It's his humanity. You can say the sunset, you can say all of these things, but they're literally mirrors, right? And so what does it mean to, in everything that he's saying, the construction, you're hearing brilliance, you're hearing experimentation, you're hearing a lot of personal quiet time and struggle and some success, right? And getting closer to that idea, but it's a very personal practice of construction, of something that you're giving the public that is a semblance of your humanity, of your mother, of the world that you're seeing, of a hard day, right? But also your pride, your happiness. All of that is in there, but it's not just nature from the outside. It's a reflection of an ambition, of a person, of a human, of someone who is searching, of a brilliance from the inside. There are two things simultaneously, right, happening here. And so to bring these two together, but I just really appreciate
Thank you, Laurent. That's beautiful. And not to put you on the spot, but a brilliant man who's sitting here, Laurent, is a curator at the Getty, and he was the one who's brought many of the important archives to the Getty, like Jet Magazine. Also, the Paul Revere Williams archive is coming to the Getty because of his brilliance too. So anyway, thank you. Yeah, and I'm blushing as well. Thank you.
We're going to end on, we have time for one more question and we'll end there.
Hi, Edgar. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, you've talked a lot about the story that happens in the gaps of the broken mirror shards. I am wondering if you could tell a little bit more, and you touched on it earlier, about the relationship between the painting and its environment and the relationship of the painting to the viewer. Yeah. Because I can imagine that there has been a very conscious choice of using the mirror, which is a device that is was specifically made to have a relationship with the viewer.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that that was not an accidental choice, and to me, I think that's a very important part of this entire series because it emanates outside of the work into the environment.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. It was a choice to abandon the things that I felt like I was good at and that I was going to lean into something that I wasn't sure if I was doing anything that was any good. So for about a year, I must have made like 90 really bad paintings, you know. And every time I would go into the studio, I would make one of these things, and I would look at it, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And I would just walk back out again. But I would just but I would just go back over and over and over again, you know, until I felt like, you know, something had emerged. But one of the things that I abandoned was the figure, you know, like drawing the human body. But the funny thing is, sometimes when you abandon something, then you wind up finding it in some sort of circuitous way, because I realized that the figure in the painting was the viewer, was the person, right? So I get to have my cake and eat it too. I get to have this space of non-representation, but then the representation is embodied by the person whom is encountering the mirror, you know? So the other thing about it too is that because the material is absorbs, it also reflects the world around it. So if Tiffany in her bright red earrings stands in front of the painting, then it's going to turn red. If it's near a window during sunset, it is going to turn a golden brown. If it's near the window during sunrise, it'll turn a cool blue. And I really like the idea of an artwork that breathes in the room with you, that changes with you. I think that like the best movies and the best songs do that. They follow you in life, and you listen to it again, and you're at a different phase of your life, and you still touches you. Like, I want to make work that's like that. You know, I want to have evergreen stuff that stays with you as you're changing. You still see yourself reflected in it. You know, that's my goal.
With that.
So I want to thank all of you for attending this very stimulating talk, Edgar, and very, very wonderful questions coming from the audience. I have to tell you, because the questions coming from the audience are not all the time this high quality.
Yeah, there's something to be
And
said.
it's really
about
good
that.
questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure. And thank you, Charles, for coming out to do
Thank
this.
you.
It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here this evening.